Okay. In the 1970s, when Rom was actually, getting to do a lot of work in India, I think during the emergency, we didn't have too many heroes, nobody to look up to. And I think one of the few people who was actually doing things on the ground, making a big difference was Rom Whitaker. And I'm especially privileged for two reasons, not just because I love nature and the natural world, but also because I work in public health. So in the 1980s, in 1988, 99, when I went to college, and during my internship, I was at the Hafkin Institute. It's a pioneering place where anti-venins are made, the snake bite cure. And a lot of people spoke about Rom and Rom's contribution in making sure that anti-venom industry, the whole manufacture of that process is organized, and anti-venom serum is available across India and now across the world. So I think his contribution is not only restricted to snakes. I think it would be unfair because he's worked on crocodiles, he's worked on turtles, he's worked on monitor lizards, you just saw that, and of course he's worked in the Andamans, he's worked all across the country. And he's raised the awareness about creatures that we tend to detest, right? Not everybody here loves snakes. So Rom's contribution has been incredible in terms of inspiring people like me. So I'm going to now shut up and not do a fanboy moment, and I'm going to dive straight in because I could do this all day, wax eloquent about Rom. So my first question is, Rom, you influenced me. I want to know who influenced you. I mean, who were your major influences? How did you get here? What went into the making of Rom Whitaker?
Well, when you say who, I've got to say you should have said what.
Okay, what?
Because, man, when I was a kid, I was 4 years old when I brought my first snake home. And I had a mother, the weirdest mother in the world, you got to admit, because how many mothers out there would say when their charming little son brings a snake home, "Look, Mommy, what I got"? What would they say? What would you say? I can imagine. Don't bother answering. But my mother said, "How gorgeous." Now, man, my brain just sort of clicked in right then and there. I know I completely forget but my mother tells me this is what she did and how I reacted. I reacted very positively and went out and brought a few more snakes home. Well, luckily we were living in northern New York State at that time and there were no venomous snakes around there. Then, a few years later came the move to India, and that's not a place where there are no venomous snakes, okay? And she happened to watch a movie called The River by Renoir, in which Satyajit Ray was the joint director. I mean, it was one of those incredible movies where a little boy, about the same age as me, blonde, plays a flute, a cobra comes, bites him, and the kid dies. And you can imagine my mother bringing this kid to India, this wacko kid already. What's he going to do? I mean, he's going to grab a cobra and die? She never started crying like I'm doing now, but she must have been scared, right? I mean, you got to admit.
Tell us more about what happens once you come to India and, your first encounter with the snake. And, I want to know more about it because those formative years, the early days in Bombay, that's something which is very, very incredible and something that I want to hear about.
Well, the short answer is buy the book, damn it.
Yeah, I think, that's it. I mean, please buy the book. It's fabulous.
No, really, Janaki and I have written extensively about my early days, and luckily my mother, I keep saying she was a weirdo, and she's the loveliest woman in the world. My mother died some years back, but her legacy and the letters she saved and the articles, letters, stuff that we've gone through to make this book successful are just amazing. And yeah, she actually sort of describes what my early days were like. We lived at Juhu Beach in Bombay, and I can't say Mumbai, I'm sorry, I'm still in the old sort of Bombay school of things. But Juhu Beach was a wide open area, there were no high rises, it was incredible. My little friends were fisher kids who taught me all the Marathi and Hindi swear words I needed to get along. And and it started there. And the first snake I saw was a big rat snake crawling behind the house. I didn't grab it because I wasn't sure about which was a cobra and which was a rat snake in those days. It took me a while. And it was only when I got up to my school in Kodaikanal in the hills, the Palni hills of Tamil Nadu, when I found my first pit viper, and I found a Russell's viper. Now, you know, I knew it was venomous, and luckily I had a friend with me who had a butterfly net, so it was a very safe capture. I just sort of scooped it out of the lake. But then I did a very strange thing. I put it in my lunchbox. I had a little tin lunchbox to take it back to the biology lab. And, you know, I had a series of lucky breaks with the adults in my life. Like the biology teacher, I said, I've got a Russell's viper. And he said, well, let's put it in an aquarium and put it in the biology lab. Kids would love to see it. Again, which biology teacher would do that, you know? I mean, anyway, I was just so lucky in having adults who encouraged my insanity.
I think there's one episode that you don't mention. I think that's something that perhaps Janaki and you should talk about, is your first experience with a snake charmer. I think it was in Bombay. I think that's a big story. I think that also kind of helped you form, you know, your fondness for snakes. Perhaps you should talk about that.
Yeah, very true. I needed I shouldn't call it a peer group, but I needed somebody who knew about snakes in India, or at least could start telling me about snakes. Okay, I was about 8 or 9 years old when a snake charmer came to a friend of mine's birthday party at Ruya Park on Juhu. And he brought a cobra and a mongoose and the usual bunch of snakes, opened a basket. And then after the show was over, I started talking with him in whatever rudimentary Hindi I had learned by that time. And he would say, this sand boa, ye do muh ka saap, 6 mahine us taraf jata aur 6 mahine is taraf jata. And I was saying, what? And he says, yeah, do muh ka saap, it has 2 heads. And I looked very carefully, and I couldn't see the second head. It was a tail. Anyway, I didn't criticize the guy. But then he brought out a cobra, which had very nice whiskers, and he said, ye bahut purana wala, dekho much. You know, he says, this snake with whiskers is a very ancient snake. And I started realizing, man, these snake charmers are so full of bullshit that, if they're going to teach people about snakes, which, I mean, there was a big crowd around listening to all this rubbish. And I think early on, I must have said, no, I've got to tell the truth about snakes. I've got to change things. I must have had that zeal. And I hate to use the word missionary because, well, I was never very happy at my missionary school. I won't go into that, but I was sort of a missionary for snakes, a proselytizer for how wonderful snakes are. Well, we'll get into a bit more of that later.
Right. I think, it's the book, for many of you who must have read it, you must have found it pretty interesting from 2 perspectives. One, on the innocence of childhood and the curiosity, of a child. And I think Rom, as he, gets into teenagers and then to his early adulthood, he tends to retain that curiosity, and he tends to continue to explore. And I think he's unabashed about his way of being a child throughout his life. And I think I want you to, because there are very few children, just a couple of children I see here, but I think you need to talk a little more about your school days, especially Kodai and Lovedale, because I think those were very, very important years, because this is the moment in people's lives when, you're told that these are not hobbies that can become into careers, and you're kind of dissuaded. So how is it that, you got to do this and we didn't?
Well, we won't talk too much about Lovedale because Lawrence School was a military school, and I was, right from the beginning, not at all impressed or happy about anything organized religion, organized violence, organized anything. No. Then I went to Kodaikanal School, and I keep using the words crazy, but it was true. They were crazy enough to let me keep a python under my bed, although they didn't know about it, actually. But I had a pet python and an air gun because I was definitely a hunter in those days. Again, we won't talk too much about that, but you can read about it. So these were my formative years. And like I said, that biology teacher who let me keep the Russell's Viper, But like Pranay says, these weren't, I mean, having a career in snakes didn't sound like anything logical for a young kid to grow up to develop into. And sure enough, well, I did it, but I was not very good at academics, and they barely got me through school. I think they purposely made me graduate so they could get rid of me, actually. And, but yeah, the same thing happened in college. I only managed to last 1 year. So it was all just a focused interest. Snakes, never mind the drugs and rock and roll. It was mainly snakes, crocodiles, all the reptiles. I was just in love with them.
Bad company, right? Okay. I couldn't think of anything else but rock and roll. Sorry, that's a bad one. Just thought, what came first? I mean, when you were, beginning to explore the idea of working in conservation, of course, there was nothing like, I mean, there were tiger walas and, those kind of people who were established, in the early 70s. I mean, tiger conservation had just begun, but what came first for you? I mean, gharials, crocs, snakes, macaques. What was it? I mean, how did you get about it? I mean, how did you build a career?
It developed in the United States. When I went back supposedly to go to college and totally flunked out, once I flunked out, I realized, hell, I have to make a living at some. So I was a merchant seaman, I was a traveling salesman. There's lots of jokes about that, by the way.
Salacious ones.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about it right now. But the point was, I tried all these jobs to try to make a living. And ultimately, I ended up at something called the Miami Serpentarium. This was run by a guy called William Haast. Bill Haast was and continues to be the most snake-bitten man in the world. But he also had the largest venom production center in the world. And man, he was a total guru, if there ever was one. And he was a very quiet man, however, and he wouldn't really reveal all his secrets. I had to sort of sneak in behind him in the lab when he was doing his work, watch him extract venom, and all the things I learned from his work ethic, his incredible work ethic, the way he handled snakes, the way he looked after them, all these things I learned from him. And deep in my funny brain, I said, well, I'm going back to India. India is my home, and I've got to set up a snake park when I get back. So that's how it started, really.
Before I come back to you, I want to ask Janaki, does he have a crazy work ethic? Does he drive you mad when you are working on projects together? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from the time I first met him, he was always like that. The day started at 8 a.m. He would walk around the croc bank with a clipboard making his rounds of all the jobs that needed to be done, hand it off to whoever needed to do that job. And he would work in the office answering every single letter. In those days, it was snail mail. They would come in postcards, inland letters, kids writing, tell me about snakes, or something really general. And he would reply to every person. And I just could not believe that he would go to that effort and reply to every email. And he still does that. I mean, every letter then. Now he replies to every email. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. I think, learning from your mentors, picking up those habits. But, I wanted to ask you, the Miami Serpentarium is very different in design, at least in what you explain in the book and how you translated it in the form of the snake park that you created. So what were the kind of things that you learned from Billy Haas, and what did you innovate here that was different?
I think, for one thing, I wanted to start up a venom production lab of my own. And I did start that. I started at a place called Gaimukh Bandar, which is out beyond Thane, outside of Bombay. And I wasn't doing very well because they had banned the export of venom, but I did sell it to the Cancer Research Institute, so I was making a few bucks. But I wanted to make it something bigger. So when I moved to Madras, Chennai, and set up the snake park, I had already contacted the Irla tribesmen, and they were really my peer group. I had found the people who know snakes like nobody else. They know how to find snakes just by following a small track in the sand, looking at a rat hole and say, the snake has gone in. And I say, yeah, what snake? Cobra. And sure enough, they would dig it out and out would pop a cobra. So when I started extracting venom and selling it, realized that why should I be doing this? I can do anything. I can make films, which I did make later on. Why don't we get the Irlas to do it? And so the Irlas and I concocted this idea. Once the Wildlife Act came in and snakeskin industry was totally closed down, the Irlas were starving. They had no more work to do, but they still caught snakes. So we organized something called the Irla Snake Catchers Cooperative. This is 1978. They started extracting venom from snakes and then releasing them back to the wild. And to this day, they are the major suppliers of venom to make antivenom. Now, these Irlas are simple folks, man. They're too cool. And to try to convince them or tell them, look, you are saving lakhs of lives all over India by supplying this venom for antivenom production. They haven't got a clue. They really don't. They're just so innocently wonderful. They say, yeah, we catch snakes, we extract venom, the venom gets sold, we get an income. But they are doing a service, a great service to the country.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a brilliant initiative that you bring in traditional knowledge and you serve a community which you're not even sure of where it exists. I mean, somebody bitten in the far corners of the country would benefit from the anti-venom that is developed in another place, say in Bombay, Hafkin Institute. So it's an amazing, amazing initiative which I think has not got the attention that it should have got. But I also wanted you to, perhaps talk briefly about the role of snakes in control of rodent populations. I think that's an interesting story about which we have kind of not looked at. I think 22% to 25% of all grain in India is lost to rodents, Even at the point of harvest, it goes into these burrows and warrens of these rodents that collect and, they keep a larder of these grains for winter and for, more dreary times when there may not be enough grain. So I think that's something that affects India's food security, and I think I want you to talk about that as well.
It's true, and we had to bring a bit of science into this, okay? So 1984, 85, we went to what was called the Department of Science and Technology, and they gave us a grant to look at the Irla possibility in rodent control. And this is not using pesticides or traps, this is by hand capture. The pest control people would say, yes, we are putting out 2 baits, and for every 2 baits we put out, we get 1 rat. And I say, but where are the rats? Oh, they die in the hole. No, wait a minute, how do you know this? Oh, no, we know this. But they didn't have the data. When the Irlas went out and caught rats, they would bring back a handful, 1 or 2 dozen, and this is, catching them by hand. This was proof that their method was much, much better. So this grant that we got enabled us to go out into the fields for several months. The Irlas caught 250,000 rats, and the main thing is they recovered 5 tons of grain from rat holes. Now this was an incredible eye-opener, and I thought, okay, the next stage is that the pest control companies have got to go into this as a biological pest control. Well, my sister and my brother were very essential in helping me set up the snake park, and my sister's an artist, and she designed a shirt which was called Pest Busters, very much like the Ghostbusters T-shirts, and we were going to have a rat control project. It never took off. We're still waiting for somebody out there to take off with this because the Irlas are still there. They're still the best rat catchers in the world. What potential and how much grain we could save. And the farmers were very happy to have an Irla come and pull all the rats out of their fields.
Yeah, it's a missed opportunity. I think somehow we don't build in the evidence that we have and the traditional knowledge that we've got. We don't leverage it, and I think it's a travesty. I think it's a very sad situation. I want to bring you in, Janaki, now and ask you. You wrote a book called My Husband and Other Animals. What kind of animal is? No.
Did I really need to answer that?
No, you need to describe him a little more. I mean, does he change as an animal year by year, like the Chinese zodiac, or is it day by day, by the minute? I mean, does he evolve? Does he devolve? I want an honest answer from you.
No, I don't think he's ever grown up. He's like the child that still does the same thing after he grows up. I mean, most people are into animals at one stage, then they graduate to motorbikes or football maybe, and then they go on to become engineers, do grown-up things. He is still a grown child.
Right. I think we can go for the movie, the second movie, please.
Okay, let me just give an
Sure, go ahead.
introduction to this. So, like Rom was describing about the Irula community, they are expert snake catchers, and at the time of the snakeskin industry, they wiped out populations of snakes like pythons. Like in some areas, these species have gone extinct. And in the States, pet trade is a big deal, and reptiles are probably the third most traded animals next to fish and birds or something like that. And a lot of times people buy python babies. They are very small, they're very, very cute, and once they get bigger, they release them into the nearest habitat, which in Florida is the Everglades. And in combination with all these releases, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew came through the peninsula, and a pet trade company had a bunch of some 900 python babies in little, plastic containers that you get in takeaways. And the hurricane just swept through and seeded these baby snakes all over the Everglades. Now there are hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million of them in this wetland. And they've been trying for 12 years to get rid of these pythons from the Everglades. They don't belong there. These are Burmese pythons found in the Himalayan foothills over into Myanmar and into Southeast Asia. And they are eating all of the native mammals of the Florida area. And I think the numbers that are quoted are like, there's been a 98% decline in mammal numbers. And so Rom's big idea was, why not take the people who were responsible for some of the local extinctions to that area and cause an extinction of an invasive species that is eating up native wildlife. So we took 2 Irula snake catchers to the Everglades, and we were not sure at all how this would go, because these are people who know the natural world of Tamil Nadu, where they normally hunt. And here is the completely different landscape. The bird species that they normally rely on to alert them about snake presence are different. There are venomous water snakes, which you don't find in India. So we were really worried that these guys might get bitten or something would go wrong, but they really proved their value. They are incredible, even when transplanted out of their native area right across the world into a completely alien landscape.
Can I interject one moment? We have found Burmese pythons in India and Bangladesh up to 14 feet long, okay? But in the Florida Everglades, thanks to the good Kana of America, yes, they grow to 18 feet long. They're huge. They're massive.
Yeah. Okay, let's do the movie, and then we open up for question and answers.
Yeah, I stepped right on it, man.
Oh, wow.
Whoa! Hi! Okay, what are you going to do?
Here.
Okay, let's bag it up.
அந்த இன்னொரு பேக் கருப்பு துணி பேக் வச்சிருந்தாரா
Give it a try. We'll get this on video.
Big smile. 8 snakes in one day, you guys. What? This is one day. Ridiculous.
I think we're going to open up for. I've got time for one more question. Okay, so we're going to open up for questions, but please do not preface with a long introduction. Just the question, please, and direct it to either of them or both of them, but please be very direct. Yeah, the gentleman here, please.
So why are snakes generally reviled compared to other creatures, and why are they considered like sacred to Lord Shiva?
That's a very good point. I mean, India's got this incredible dichotomy of worshiping snakes and getting killed by snakes. No, I'm not trying to make a joke or anything like here or treat it lightly, but we did a study. I'm a co-author of a study called the Million Death Study. And although the government of India's statistics showed that 1,500 people were killed by snakes every year, the Million Death Study came out with an accurate figure that actually 58,000 men and women and children are killed by snakes every year in India. And people look at me, so you like snakes, huh? You're bloody out of your mind. Now, this is really why we're trying to get people to understand snakes, understand their behavior, how to avoid getting bitten, and mainly by using a light at night, for example, sleeping under a mosquito net, watching where they walk when they're walking into the rice field. I know this is a lot to ask, but if the farming community are the primary sort of people who are in danger from being bitten by a snake, and if they get to a primary health center, does the primary health center have antivenom? Is there transport? The 108 ambulance service is incredible, but it does not serve the entire country. So there's lots to do. The government of India has really opened up and wakened up, and a lot is happening, but a lot more has to happen.
Right, great question. Is this the Prabhat Jha study? The Million Death Study was Prabhat Jha, right? Yeah, that's a brilliant study. Where are the mics? Okay, the gentleman here. We'll come to you.
Thank you very much for so beautiful and dangerous movies. I am a Persian writer. In the Persian literature, the old Persian literature, the snakes are the protector of wisdom and richness. What do you think about it?
Yeah, that's great, but I wish they would somehow relook at that because symbol of evil. Oh, wisdom. Oh, wisdom. Okay. Yeah, I'll go with that. But also with evil, because the Garden of Eden story.
Persian.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good.
Do you want to answer it? Right. No, yeah. Go ahead. I mean, let Janaki answer it.
Yeah, it's world over. Snakes are symbolic of various things. It's great that they symbolize wisdom. In India, it's a fertility symbol, and in other areas, they symbolize other things, good and bad. So humans have this need to make meaning of something they don't understand, right? It's really great that they symbolize wisdom in Persia.
And right, in Jain mythology, it's the snake, which is the 12-headed snake, is a sign of protection. But also, if the snake is shown apart from the Tirthankars, it is seen as a sign of apocalypse. So, of a protection against apocalypse. So, I think, yeah, it's something that perhaps has deeper meanings in the legends and the mythologies.
And perhaps all of this comes from the fact that they are so hard to understand. They are like an exotic creature from some very, very distant galaxy. You know, it's very hard to understand snakes. You hardly get to see them. Zip, they go by. And it's only, you know, if you're able to, like me, keep a bunch of snakes and watch them day after day and sort of commune with them. But they don't hear, for one thing. Yeah, and they don't have legs. And they crawl along so beautifully without legs. The king cobra female builds a huge nest out of leaves without legs. I mean, they do incredible things. They are just totally mystical.
Right, but pythons have a primordial hip, right? that's an incredible thing. I mean, it's an evolutionary wonder, and they also have tiny, you know, protrusions around those hips, which perhaps help them. They're possibly devolved into from.
Well, they evolved from lizards.
Yeah, they evolved from lizards, but they were the last reptiles to emerge. So you know, they're enigmatic in that sense as well. Okay, question from this young man. Yes.
Do you think humans and snakes
Louder.
Do you think humans and snakes can have bonds?
Sorry, you need to speak louder. I couldn't hear.
Can humans and snakes have a relationship?
Humans and snakes can have relationships.
Bond.
Can they have a relationship?
Can humans and snakes?
And snakes have a relationship.
We do, don't we, already? So we do worship them. We worship them, we study them, we watch them on television, even if not in real life. So we do have some kind of relationship with them already. Is that what you meant? Or did you mean something else?
Emotional.
Like pets.
Oh yeah, the python he kept in his dorm school was a pet for many years. So maybe they won't reciprocate the same love and affection that you have, like your pet dog might, but you can love it.
Yeah, they're more like cats, right? They just don't care.
Yeah.
About it. Yeah, the lady behind, I think the lady behind.
Yeah, actually I wanted to know, there's an empty plot next to my house and a King Cobra family lives there. So these guys, they just climb over the boundary wall and they scare the hell out of us. So in an urban scenario, is there a way to protect ourselves from snakes that live around us?
Well, do you want to take it? So typically, they're probably not king cobras. They are common cobras. They are smaller than a king cobra. And they are rat eaters. So they go where there's plenty of food. So the best way you can protect yourself is make sure your garden is clean, that you don't provide sanctuary in any way, like, you know, burrows or debris or things piled up where a snake can take refuge. And if you have a largish garden with lots of trees and they shed leaves, you make sure the path is clear so you can see where you're going. You watch where you put your hands and feet. And being careful. Think of it as a forest. Like if you go to a forest, your senses are alive. You're watching everything, paying attention to sounds. It's like that. You be aware of what you're doing. And that's the best protection against it.
And I think you need to find someone in your network. There are people who support, you know, the capture and release of snakes. Ideally, you know, snakes would not bother you. So don't think that it's going to come into your house and it, you know, they're like, no creature is there to, you know, willfully attack you, you know. I mean, yeah. So that, I don't think that, I mean, like Rom said, do not come into their path, be a little cautious, and they would not disturb you. The lady behind, I think her hand's been up for long.
Yeah. So I have the good privilege of being at the San Diego Zoo very recently, and it's got some spectacular collection of reptiles, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But what I want to know from you, what are your views of having reptiles in zoo? I mean, as much as I enjoyed it, do they enjoy it, and is it morally the right thing to do? What's your viewpoint is my question.
That's a really good question, and it's something that we are addressing because we've noticed, for example, that creating environments for any captive animal is pretty difficult if you want to, say, keep them happy, so to speak. And it's very difficult to assess happiness in a snake. So when we do keep snakes, for example, at the Madras Crocodile Bank or at the Snake Park, we are very careful to make sure they have all the elements that they would have in the wild, except, of course, the expansive space for them to move. So in a way, I am against keeping them. On the other hand, we have to put up with it in a sense because we want people to learn about them, and most people are not going to see snakes in the wild. I think the same applies to any animals in any zoos. There's a lot of criticism of zoos. However, they create and are such an important part of a child's learning experience, for one thing. So yes, there is a problem.
Perhaps, Rom, you should talk about your experience with the gharial in the Chambal. I think that's a case in point where you build a conservatorium and the populations improved. I think you should share that experience, and I think this will really benefit people.
Yeah, the experience that I've had with the gharial, for example, we were told and we understood that we had to breed them in captivity in order to revive the population of the gharial. It was, pardon? In the 70s, it was literally down to under 200 wild animals. But slowly but surely, we realized actually the collection of wild crocodile eggs from nests and then incubating them either on site or very close to on site and releasing them as fast as possible is a much better system than doing the captive rearing and captive breeding part of it. It took us a while to figure that out. But the gharial that we're down to a couple of hundred in the 70s are up to well over 3,000 now, particularly in the Chambal River. And it's only partly because of our captive breeding work, but mostly because of the work of our colleagues and, of course, the state government forest departments in protecting habitat. That's the big thing, protection of habitat.
Rom said something very interesting. We were talking yesterday, or was it this morning, that Chambal is perhaps the only clean river that we've got in India, and that's because we've got no industries there. There's just one big city, which is Kota, right? I mean, not too much sewage coming out of there, thankfully. But having said that, I think it goes to show that you are able to conserve a rare creature like the gharial because there's only one stretch. Otherwise, it was found right across, including the Indus, including as far as the Teesta. I mean, you found the gharial there in the 1800s. But now just one stretch where you have a so-called sustainable population created because of the hard work and the diligence of Rom Whitaker. One quick last question, and then we are closed. The lady in yellow there. Okay.
Sir, you have talked about Irola tribe being doing an important role in having the anti-venoms. But when they are bitten, they go to their traditional methods and they do not like going to the hospitals. I've seen that you mentioned. So what is the perception management we need at the ground level for the tribals and for the general public so that they are more into a scientific way of seeing the animals and also believing in the anti-venom treatment which we have in the hospitals? Thank you.
Go ahead. I think you should answer. Shall we try?
Yeah, I mean, this is so important because, well, for one thing, the herbalist, the herbal or mantra cure, or whichever local cure there is well known, and he's very cheap. He's only 50 rupees or something compared to the hospital, which will be thousands. And he's saved so many lives. Why? Because most snake bites are not fatal. And this is why they're so successful. And this is, an ongoing thing. People will say, no, don't go to a hospital. My cousin brother had died at the hospital. That's because it took 3 hours to get there. Whereas, in comparison, the local herbalist, when people go to him, they don't die because he's treated them and they survived. it's a cycle where we have to encourage people to learn about antivenom and about getting to the hospital as fast as possible.
Right, I think that's all the time we've got.